Facebook is trying to reconnect already.
All right. We're like potentially starting at So Friday.
Seems like we're connected.
Right now it's like not quite Friday. Well, it's Friday, but are we connected?
I believe we are.
Okay, now that we're here, welcome to It's So Friday. It's finally Friday, and we are really excited because this week we are going to be making the Churn About quilt. This is a very simple churn dash block, but it lets you try out making half square triangles with the 2 at the time method, and also just a lot more chain piecing. And in this particular project, we are combining 2 different substrates. So we're using the London Calling, which is a lawn weight, the kind of a finer fabric, really soft with an excellent drape. And we're combining it with an Essex metallic, which is a little bit more sturdy and has a great shine to it. So this is the new London Calling collection. It's shipping to shops now. There are 32 different fabrics that you can choose from, all different kinds of prints, from little cherries to florals, so they're really fun for quilts or for garments. The great thing about quilting with London Calling is that it's so soft and buttery, and it's just lovely to sew with. So first things first, if you want to sew along, go to robertkaufman.com, search for the London Calling 8 fabric collection, and download this Churn About quilt. You'll know you have the right version when you see this particular cover. We do have another version also in gingham, which would give you an idea about what this quilt can look like if you were to make it in some other collections. So, just to get started, the directions are going to tell you how much you need to cut for the entire quilt. And so I've already done that, and I've pieced a lot of the quilt too, so by the end of this So Friday we'll have an entire quilt. But jumping right in, with the tools you're going to need, you will need a rotary cutter and a ruler. You will also need a pen to mark on your fabric, so make sure that it is either water or heat erasable. I'm using a Pilot Friction pen. They're my favorite. You'll need some scissors, because when you're chain piecing you need some snips, and you'll need your fabric pieces. So if at any point during this you have questions, ask them out. Yael will be monitoring and will let us know if you have anything you want answered. But let's get right to it. So once you get all your pieces cut, I like to separate them into piles of background and focal fabrics. So you only need to work with one set of the 5-inch charms. So I prefer to mark on the one that's not the Essex, because Essex has a little more shift to it. So I try to not handle it as much as I can until I'm ready to sew, to prevent the fabric from stretching. So the first thing you're going to do is on the back side of, so this is the right side, on the back side of your fabric, from point to point, you're going to mark a line using your pen. So I'm going to do that real quick. Okay. And so the way you do this, you just take your ruler, line up point to point, and mark. And it is important that you are pretty close, because this is going to be your stitch guideline. So if you're way off on one side, or it's not lined up straight, you'll have a harder time getting the right size half square triangles for your blocks. Okay. Now, this project is something that you could probably complete in a weekend. It does take a little bit more time to get everything all together. The chain piecing goes very quickly, but the cutting takes about an hour and a half. If you just kind of focus and cut and iron and cut and iron and cut. And then so far I've pieced about 3.5 hours. So definitely doable in a long weekend. Now once you have all of your main fabrics with the lines drawn point to point, you will take one and pair it with a background, right sides together. And what you're going to do is you're going to sew with the scant 1/4 inch on either side of that line. So when I'm chain piecing, I like to do all of one side first and then move on to the second side. So just, and so instead of cutting that piece and flipping, I'm going to just prep the next piece while it's still attached. The great part about chain piecing is if you have a machine where the thread tends to unthread itself when you start a new piece, chain piecing eliminates that. The thread is already connected and it's not going anywhere. Now I do like to stitch just a couple stitches back and forward at the beginning and end of each one of these starter seams, because you will be pushing them or pressing them and kind of moving them, and so that's just going to give it a little more stability, so it's not going to come apart when you're sewing everything together. Okay.
What's going to be the finished quilt size? Do you know?
The finished quilt size is 54.5 by 64.5, but it's also easier to make smaller or larger just by increasing or decreasing the number of blocks that you're going to add to it. You could also decide, this quilt calls for sashing that's an inch wide between the blocks. If you decided you don't like doing sashing, which I know a lot of people who just really don't enjoy working with really thin pieces of fabric like that, you could eliminate the sashing and just sew the blocks together directly. That will make it just a tiny bit smaller. Yeah, so you kind of have a lot of control over what you're making, how long you want to commit to sewing Churn blocks.
The squeaky floor here. The floor is being really squeaky. You have a lot of people saying hello and waving hello to you. Just letting you know. You know, waves, thumbs ups.
Okay. All right. So once you've chain pieced, you'll have your chain of piecing. And so at this point, I do like to clip all the individual seams and then sew the other sides. If you're doing this all together, like for the entire quilt all at once, you're gonna have a really long chain. Sometimes if you're doing, like if you're following this pattern, it can be helpful to work by color. So like if you have 3 of this one, sewing all of those together at one time. If you have a directional fabric, then you need to, when you're cutting, be really mindful of the fact that the fabric will be going in 2 different directions when it gets to the bars of your block, like here, 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 and here. So if you have a fabric where it has a direction, you'll need to cut 2 this way and 2 this way. And this pattern does adjust for that, because we do have a directional print in this group.
We have some folks in Ireland and Australia saying hello.
Oh wow. From
Gone
the future.
international.
It's the future, right? Right? Ireland's in tomorrow too?
If you're watching our Facebook feed, my apologies if it's a little not great right now.
We've been having some Wi-Fi struggles, but we're working on it.
It
So
was
hopefully,
doing so well up until like
this week
second.
will be smooth sailing. And this looks like I'm doing the exact same thing that I was literally just doing like not too long ago, but I'm just doing the exact same thing on the other side of the line that I drew.
I'm gonna fed up with this.
Whoops. Okay. Whoa. Okay. We are getting there little by little. Alright. So once you have completed that, you'll have 2 lines of stitching and about a 1/2 inch, well, if you did it right, about a 1/2 inch in between the 2 lines of stitching. So once again, you're just going to trim the threads connecting your blocks. Be really careful that you don't accidentally trim into the block. It can get really easy to accidentally cut your block if you're over eagerly trimming. I know about that. I've done that. Now, the next step is to line up your ruler on the line that you drew from point to point and cut straight down the middle. So we're gonna do that now. Okay.
Nicole really likes
What a goof. Nicole designed this one for us, I think, right? Right?
I don't know.
Maybe.
I'm sure she'll let us know.
All right. Whoa. So if you're not careful, you might not trim quite on your line. You might trim over your line, and so one half will have a really narrow seam allowance, which is probably not great. And if I was doing this at home, I maybe would make a new one. But sometimes when I do this, the only thing I do to fix it is I just take a zigzag stitch and I zigzag over the seam that maybe isn't quite a 1/4 inch, because in my head that's going to help stabilize it. And so I'm just going to call that a win and say, yep, okay. It's not an 1/8, it's maybe like just shy of a 1/4. So I just zigzagged over there for some additional support, and now I'm putting that in my pile and no one will know. I kind of figure if I make someone a quilt and the seam pops, eventually, I'll make them another one, and or I'll fix it later. I do that a lot. Okay. Now I have my stack of not pressed half square triangles. So they look like this, but when you open them, they look like this. Okay, now is the fun part, kind of. You need to press all of these open, not open, just press. And because this fabric, the London Calling, is thinner than the Essex, I like to press with the Essex seam staying flat, just because it gives it a little less resistance, and the London Calling folds and presses a little nicer. So I'm using an Aliso iron over here, and it's a smart iron, so when I touch it, it drops down to the ironing board and prevents me from burning my ironing station. Thinking we're having some issues with Facebook, maybe.
I don't know. I can't really tell what's happening here. Sometimes it's working.
And if you are not using water in your irons, I like to use a little bit of Flatter. It's a spray starch alternative, and it helps just keep your fabric nice and crisp and obedient. If you have a really big ironing surface, you can do this many at a time. The way I like to do it is I lay them kind of out, and then I finger press a little bit so that it seems like the fabric already knows which way I want it to go. Then I give each one a little spurt of Flatter, and then I iron. Alright, so we're getting there. Just a few more. Whoa, those ones wanted a second go at the iron. Whoa, hey, listen. Obey. Okay. Now, you would think, yay, we've pressed, we're ready to go. And you would be almost right, except for the part where you wouldn't be right. It is really important to square up your blocks. It is not super fun. It is tedious. You can make cutting mistakes really easily, but it is very important for the sake of your sanity to square up your blocks. So I'm looking at the directions, which sometimes I don't do well, but it's important to read the directions right. So I'm checking how much to square them up. So it does say to trim to 4.5 inches square. So now, using your ruler, go ahead and measure. I match the 4.5 point and the other point, the 0, 0 point, of my ruler, so I know that those points are accurate, and then I give it a good quick trim and rotate the block and trim again. And when you do this, you'll see that just shy of 1/8 of an inch comes off on each side. It's enough where if you are trying to piece this without squaring up, your blocks will be too large and they will not go together nicely when you're trying to piece your finished quilt, and it'll be kind of a headache. So it's better to have this headache now with squaring up than the headache of like trying to make oversized blocks fit into a smaller space than they need to later.
Facebook is disconnected, so.
Now when you're doing squaring up like this, I'm always tempted. I've heard that it can be great to have like a rotating mat so that you don't have to physically move the piece. I always feel like, especially when you're doing things like this, it's always better when you can not kind of fuss with the fabric as much as possible, because that'll keep it from getting stretched out. Did Facebook reconnect?
No, so I'm thinking. I'm not really sure because I think we missed a bunch of stuff that you said in the middle.
We need IT. Does anyone have exciting sewing plans for the weekend? I was so thrilled to wake up and realize that tomorrow I could sew all day, except in the morning when I have to take my dog to the doctor to just give her a checkup, and I have to have a breakfast. But I'm going to see my mom and dad, and that's always fun. So that's not like have to go see my mom and dad. I'm excited about that. But then I'm going to sew, and that'll be fun. I always love weekends where I don't have plans and I don't have to do things, because then uninterrupted time with my sewing machine. And I got a new iron that I'm having fun with, and it's thrilling. And I cleaned my room the other day, so you can like see the ground and you can see the fabric, and it's just this novel concept. I haven't done that in a long time. Still squaring up. So you can see how if you were doing this for an entire quilt worth of blocks, it could get kind of tedious and take a little bit of time, but we are getting there. We are almost done, and once you do this, it is worth it, I promise. It just takes a little bit to get there. All right. If you want to see like a whole bunch of trimmings from an entire quilt worth, I posted a picture of what that looks like on my Instagram a few days back when I was working on this, and it's kind of a mess at the end, and I'm really glad that you don't have to deal with it later. So you should see Elle. She's like over here like trying to figure out what's going on.
If you're watching on Facebook and you just tuned back in after that major lull, we once again will be posting a full video after this broadcast so that you can see the whole thing, hopefully a lot more clearly than you just did. And next time we do Sew Friday,
it'll be perfect.
It'll be perfect.
Okay. Yes. So what you'll notice is that if you didn't sew correctly on a 1/4 inch from your line, it'll be a little bit trickier to get your blocks to square up at the 4.5 inches because they might be a little bit smaller than they need to be. So if you are not super confident in your accuracy and your seam allowance, I sometimes will actually cut my pieces a little bit bigger and then square up, because it's always easier to make a block smaller than to make it magically get bigger after you've cut it. So if you are going to do that though, then just know it will impact your fabric requirements. So you would want to plan for that increase. Okay, we're almost there. This is the last block to square up. I feel like squaring up blocks is kind of like a gym workout, because you like press down here and you're like this and this, and it's basically like going and lifting weights at the gym. Same thing. So you've done your exercise for the day, and look at all this stuff that you have that would have been giving you a headache. We're going to throw it away. Okay. Now, you have your nice pile of half square triangles pressed and squared up. So I'm just going to set those aside, and I'm going to go back to my rectangles. Now, these are the same size, and what you're going to do is chain piece them right sides together, and there are 4 for each block. Now, again, the Essex is going to be a little bit shiftier and will pull a little bit more. So, oh no, my machine is unthreaded. Whoops. Whoa. I need to find a seam ripper. I don't know where I put it. Found it. Alright, I found it. Thank you. I found it, John. Alright, rethreading that machine. Whoa, too soon. Okay. Okay, so now my machine is rethreaded, and I'm going to unstitch that little bit that went a little crazy. Anyway, so like I was saying, the Essex is a little shiftier, and so what I found when I was sewing it was that it was more helpful for me to put the London Calling on the bottom closest to my feed dogs and the Essex on top, because when the Essex was on the bottom, it seemed to be wanting to pull a little bit more with my machine than I wanted it to. And again, I'm just going to stitch a little bit front and back, forward and back at the beginning of the seams to lock them in. Okay. Oh, I just said that thing about putting the London Calling on the top and the bottom, and then I didn't do it. As long as you're careful and you're not pulling, it's kind of okay. It'll work either way, but maybe it was just when I did find it helpful, so I remember I even pinned when I was assembling this quilt because I didn't want it to pull too much, and I never pin. So keep them on hand only for the case of emergencies. Whenever I pin, I always forget that I have pins and things, and then I stab myself, and it's not super fun. So that's why I avoid pins. This is the kind of project that's really great to do if you have like a TV episode or something that you like want to listen to but don't want to pay a ton of attention to because it's very repetitive, so you just kind of get in the groove of stitching and pulling and doing the same thing over and over and over, which I think kind of describes a lot of quilting, which is why at least I like it, that repetitive nature.
For those who are just tuning in, we are making the Churn About quilt, which can be found on our website by going to the London Calling 8 collection page.
Looks like that.
There's another version available on our site as well that you can find just by typing in Churn About quilt.
And the difference that you'll see between those two, other than that the London Calling one is colored with the London Calling fabrics, is that the London Calling pattern will account for fabric with directionality. So the first one features gingham, which is a fun alternative way to make this project. But if you want to use something that does have a clear directionality, make sure that you read that part of the pattern in this version, because it will make a difference. Unless you don't mind if things are going upside down, sideways, and all the different directions at once. Okay, now that you've chain pieced, yes, I feel like I'm in a parade. Okay, I hope this is the still that Facebook decides to keep. Alright. Anyway, trim them. Maybe don't aggressively use them like flags. It could stretch them out. I don't know. We'll see. So I'm just using my scissors here. If you have a pair of snips, it wouldn't be a bad idea to use your snips here. But I don't.
God,
I'm
it looks
using
so
my scissors.
crazy doing that. It's a little bit lagging on my computer.
I love it. I want that to be my profile picture.
We can crop it down for you later.
Oh, good. I'm so pleased. Okay, now press them. And I'm going to do the same thing I did, except this time I'm going to line up a whole bunch at once because then maybe I don't have to iron as much. I don't mind ironing. I just kind of wish we didn't have to. You know, I wish that everything magically pressed itself. I don't know. I know that's not a real thing. Don't worry. helping the fabrics along first by telling them where I want them to go, and now I'm going to spray it all with some flatter, and I'm going to just press.
Is that the sound?
Yes, that's
Okay.
the ironing sound. It's important that you have sound effects to go with your quilting. I feel like most people already do that in their heads. All right, we are getting there. All this that we're doing live is for 3 blocks. So let's see, the quilt has 20 blocks. So you can imagine it could take a little bit of time, but it does, it is a pretty quick chain piecing project, but it will take you a few hours. All right, now that you have these pieces and these pieces, now it's time to sort them by color. So if you were doing this for the whole quilt, you would lay them out in groups. And it's important to know that you have 2 of these for every, or 4 of these for every 2, or let me start again. 4 of these for every 4 of these, but you only want to sew a bar to 2 of them to start, and then you'll sew the bar to the other side. If you sew a bar to every side, you would be fine. You would just have to do Y seams, and it would be a pain in the neck. So maybe you'd be less fine after you did that, and you'd be seam ripping and unhappy. So it's important. Okay, I am missing a block. Where did I put it? 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3, 4. Oh, here it is. Okay. Now that I have them sorted by color, I'm going to just set the top 2 aside so I don't accidentally sew them together, because when you're in a chain piecing groove, you don't want to get disrupted. And now, just sew them together. Now, it's important when you sew them that you sew like this, okay? Because if you sew like this, you will make a block, but it won't be a churn dash. So, if you want a churn dash, sew like this. And you could sew, yeah, I was gonna say you could sew on either side as long as it looks like that. All right. I have a different sewing machine at home, and I'm getting really used to where the reverse stitch placement is, so I keep trying to reach for it. It's not there. It's at a different spot on this machine. Okay. Life is hard. And when you're doing this, you might do most of them right and then find out you accidentally messed one up, and that's okay. That happens to the best of us. Then you just seam rip. I spend a lot of time with my seam ripper. I have so many because I lose them. And then I just make new friends with another one. Then my old one comes out and he's like, hey, I wanna hang out again. And we spend more time together. It's nice.
You spend time with seam rippers or friends. Either way, it works.
It's true.
Everyone has their preferences. Right.
What, spending time with my seam ripper?
Yeah.
Okay, we are almost there. Okay. Oh,
Did you mess up?
I need some background fabric. I didn't cut out a piece. All right, just occurred to me that I didn't cut out a piece of this. Just get to it. Yeah, I don't have it.
What is that?
Oyster. I don't have it here. Maybe we have a fat quarter somewhere. You'll have these now, little 2 pieces. And you're going to trim them all. Can we pull it out of any bundle?
I don't know if we have oyster.
Oh, maybe we do. I'm gonna call Lisa. Oh, there it is. All right. It's good when you have the fabric on hand.
Troubleshooting.
Ooh.
Wait, was the top one?
Yep, that was the top one.
Am I
Okay, so you'll have these that you just pieced. And now these all need to have the other side of it attached,
We just found a piece.
like this. So first, Well, you could decide if you're going to press or not right now. I'm not. I'm going to press later. So I'm going to, again, sew here to here. Make sure that it looks like this, because if you sew like this, or like that, you'll be making something, just not a churn dash. Okay. So, sewing this together. And you will do this for all of those pieces that you had just put together. When you sew, you'll notice that you have a seam allowance going right down the center of the bar block, this block. So just be careful to not have it, sometimes when that piece is near your feed dogs, it might try and flip a different direction. And to create less bulk in your fabric, you want it to stay nice and flat. So just take it slow, treat it with care. Okay. This was a fun adventure because I just realized that I totally cut all the stuff and then maybe left some pieces at home. So I'm going to recut them here, and it'll be really exciting so you can see what it's like to cut some squares. It's just thrilling. World is... Okay. Whoa. All right. Almost done with this. Okay. And okay, so now you've got these, and this is very exciting. So exciting. Okay, trim them and press them. I like to press when I have a piece block like this. I like to press so that this seam goes down so that there's not like a weird pressure back. So I push this seam down and then this seam up. So I'm going to lay them all out, and I'm going to lay them out with the right sides down so that I can see what's going on there. And again, just spray them with a little bit of flatter. And I kind of give it, oh, I totally just did the wrong thing. I kind of hold the one side while I press so that I don't get like a bubble bump in my fabric. And if you want, like if you're being really thorough, then you could also then turn them around and give them another press from the top to make sure you didn't catch anything. But I'm not going to do that right now. So you've got 2 of each of these. We still have another one to press. Okay. Put that out with some spray and then pressing. Okay. All right. Now you've got most of a churn dash block, maybe 2/3 of it, exactly 2/3 of it. I'm going to set that aside. Now you have these bars, and what you need is a center square, which I didn't cut out. So I'm going to go read the directions for what size I should cut out for the center square, which is kind of important. Let's see. Let's see if I can just find it. I think it's 4.5 inch square. You know, a really easy way to check would be to just measure how big this thing is, but I think it's 4.5. It's 4.5. And because I'm making 3 churn dash blocks right now, whoa, I need 3 4.5 inch squares. So let's iron this beautiful piece of fabric that saved the day, because that would have been awkward. And go from there. Essex is a kind of stubborn fabric to iron. So when you're ironing and you want to make sure you get nice crisp fabric without bumps in it, put your iron on the hottest setting and use a lot of water mist or flatter to really make sure that it doesn't keep any of the creases, especially if it was folded up nice in a fat quarter bundle. It's going to be a little stuck. Okay, so I'm going to cut 4.5 inches. 1, 2, 3, 4.5 by 9. You know what I just learned not too long ago? I learned that you are not supposed to use the lines on your cutting mat to measure what you are cutting, because when you cut, you actually move the lines a little bit in your mat. So if you're repetitively cutting and you think that you're cutting a 9-inch based on your mat, it's not necessarily exactly 9 inches. But if you use the lines on your ruler, those lines don't move. So, well, they shouldn't, unless maybe you cut your ruler and then moved it. But for the most part, your ruler is going to be more accurate, so it's better to measure that way. If you think for a second that stopped me from using my ruler or my mat to measure things, you'd be wrong. But all right, so I have my 3 pieces of fabric now, and what you're going to do is take one and sew like this. Okay, now make sure that you don't take the next one and sew to the next thing, because then you'll have a weird churn dash block that doesn't look like the picture. So I'm going to set 3 aside and get 3 here, and make sure that you don't accidentally sew S6 to S6, because then you will not have the right layout for your churn dash. It would be kind of a bummer. You'll have to seam rip, and you'll maybe be sad. You'll at least have a headache. Okay.
It's looking great, Elizabeth.
Oh, thanks, Yael. Okay, so once you've done this, you're recognizing your chain piecing, right? It should look like this. You're going to again trim, and you could wait to press. I'm going to wait to press. Now, whoa, okay. Now you have this, so find the matching one and sew it like this. The right sides together, and stitch, stitch, stitch. All right.
What's that song you're humming?
That's my sewing song.
Does it have lyrics?
Not yet.
Okay.
It could. Sew, we should sew. Let's go sew. Whoops, I made a mistake. Okay.
Copyright that.
Oh, I just did a dangerous thing. I used my seam ripper to separate the pieces, which you can do, but if your hand shakes at all and you accidentally are like, whoa, you're gonna cut the wrong thing. My hand doesn't shake that dramatically, but it shakes enough that I did actually cut into a wrong piece the other day. Okay, before you press, take a look at what directions you pressed these. So these ones are going down. So on this one, you want these to press out so that they will nest, which is nice, because the Essex already kind of is more powerful, stronger than the London Calling, so it already wants to turn that way anyway. So we're just gonna let it. All right. Give it a press. Again, just gently holding one side firm to iron so that there's not like a bump in the fabric underneath. Okay, now we're almost there. I'm gonna take this and sew it. Yes, sew it. But if you're a believer in pins, you could pin at these midpoint joints, or you could just sew it. So we're just gonna sew it. Now, I didn't pin any of these. Oh, I might have pinned these at home, just because like as I got more tired, it just seemed like they moved a lot more. Probably because of me, not the fabric, but you know. And so pinning just kept it in place and made it so I could sew a little bit faster. But live on air, we're just gonna go for it. Who knows? All right. Same thing with the next 2 blocks. sections where your seams are nesting, just be careful not to let the feed dogs kind of bully a seam into going away. It doesn't want to go, because you want to have that control.
Such bullies.
Feed dogs, they can be real punks. Sometimes they're helpful. I guess a lot of the times they're helpful. Okay. Whoa. This one might have been good for me to pin, but I'm just gonna go for it. I think it's good. Okay. Alright. We're not done. Again, the chain pieces just get bigger and bigger, and it's very exciting, so. Alright. Now, we are going to, I might press it at this point, just so that I don't have to have the whole thing kind of folded under, and it's annoying. Alright, we're like 2/3 of the way there. I know I said we were 2/3 of the way there before too, when you had like 2/3 of the stuff pieced, but now we're really 2/3 of the way there.
You're like a trainer at the gym.
My math is like
You're almost done.
so good.
Now just a little bit more.
What kind of sewing machine are you using?
This sewing machine is a Janome 8900. It is super fancy and I love it. I used to sew on this one at home too. You can do all kinds of different stitches, so it has an AccuFeed system. So there's feed dogs that are here, but then you also can have a foot that is your 1/4 inch foot with a feed dog built in on the top too, so it accurately feeds it. And sorry, I have sniffles from the fabric dust. But it goes really fast, it is very accurate, and it can do a lot of different things. Not just straight stitch, but also like all kinds of zigzag stitches, decorative stitches. I think you can even teach it like how to spell things. Not like in a weird 2001 Space Odyssey robot learns and takes over the world thing, but like I think you can program it to spell it like Kyle. I ran out of a bobbin.
Oh man.
I have
I feel like this happened the last time. we
no
were doing
last
this.
time I didn't run out of a bobbin.
Oh, did your thread break?
Yeah.
Something happened.
I have a really sad, not quite there bobbin. I thought for sure it would get me through the episode, but I have a feeling we'll be winding a bobbin this episode. So
Ooh.
it's like a day at the fair, carnivals. Okay. I thought we were done with that one, but we're not. Behind the camera, all I just see is Yael over here like.
Something
Not
funny
that funny. I
happened.
don't know
I'm
what the heck
sorry.
she's doing.
I'm sorry. It's been a really long week.
All the merriment started when our boss came in.
It's true. It's all her fault.
Bringing the merriment? Well, I'm sorry, people.
This is a serious
I'm
sewing
just
show.
Too darn merry.
I just literally knee slapped.
Alright, so we are almost done. I hope we don't run out of bobbin on these 3 blocks, because we still have a quilt to piece together. We're not done. Okay. Whoa. I feel the dogs changing the direction of one of my pressed seams. Okay. Now you have 3 quilt blocks done. Now, imagine that you just did that 17 more times and you have 20 done and you are feeling really accomplished and you've already cut out all your sashing and started piecing a quilt together and you are like pleased as punch, as you should be at this point in your project, because you just have pretty much like you're like 2/3 of the way to a quilt.
That's 2/3. That's the only fraction Elizabeth knows.
Just like no matter where you are, you're always
Always
2/3 of the way through something.
All right. So you just made these blocks. Good for you. Well, good for me. Thank you. I made these blocks. I'm so pleased. Now imagine that you've cut out all your sashing, and your sashing is cut this 1.5 by 12.5. Yeah, and it's very fidgety with the Essex. So be careful not to mess with this too much. And using your visual reference guide here, you want to attach one piece of sashing to the right side of a block for the first 3 blocks in your row. Your 4th block won't have sashing in it because it's going to be the edge of your quilt. This is helpful to do row by row or with some visual reference, just so that you don't accidentally mix up your placement. But if you don't care where your placement of your quilt is, then good for you. Do this with all of them except for 4, 5. Yeah. And so I'm gonna press this real quick and then I'll show you, and you'll have to do it, well, I'll have to do it a couple more times. But imagine like this. So this is this side of your block.
Would you starch the sashing before?
If you are going to starch your fabric, I would starch all of your fabric. And actually with Essex or something fidgety like this, it would probably make your life a lot easier, because starch will keep your fabric from getting kind of shifty. And that's my biggest frustration, I feel like, when I work with any other substrate other than cotton, is that it does tend to move around. Did Anita ask that?
No.
Oh, okay.
But I'm sure she is watching.
Yeah, sash is, if you're going to starch before you cut your strips, because when you starch fabric, I feel like it tends to go like this. So you would want to have it be all the same and then cut. All right, one more of these. All right. So. We're getting there. Now imagine, this is going to be really exciting and hard to imagine, but imagine that you've done this a whole bunch of times and you have got all your stuff in rows, and now what you want to do is sew 2 of them together so that you have, you know, like a block like this. It was like I did this ahead of time, and a block like this. Now, when you have a block with directionality, make sure that you are paying attention to the placement of it. So that you don't accidentally piece it in upside down. But then you will just put them together with the one side that has the sashing paired with another side that doesn't have the sashing, and sew together. I guess we could have just showed you on the ones that I was just doing, but that wouldn't have been fun. So, look at this. It's like you get to see, whoa, I think I accidentally did a locking stitch instead of a back stitch. So, well, there's that. Okay, so now you have like a nice row. Whoa, really cool. Now repeat that with the blocks that you just made. So you're not done. So
2/3 of the way.
Just 1/3 left. You're so close.
You're really close. Okay, so we're sewing. This is a great project for like a sew day with your guild or something, because it's not a lot that you can mess up. It's a very repetitive one, so it's good for like when people are talking to you, or if you're worried you're gonna run out of bobbin again, which I'm just any second now it's gonna happen. I'm gonna have to stop everything and wind a new bobbin. And I don't know that I have enough random conversation to.
You
fill
can just
with
sing.
jokes.
You can just sing your sewing song over and over and
I don't
over
think
again.
everyone would appreciate my sewing song that much.
I think you'd be surprised.
I was not paying attention, and I didn't line my blocks up straight, so my seam allowance is going a little funky there. So I'm just trim that and start again. No regrets over here. Okay. Right, we are getting there. Whoa. I'm really not used to where the buttons go on this machine. Alright. So, remember that whole imagine you had this piece and this piece thing put together and then do that thing? We're going to do that again.
That was so descriptive.
Two
I really
rows.
was great.
Two rows.
The thing with
Yeah, the thing with the thing, and it's a thing.
Star Trek sewing jokes. How is that?
Wow,
It's going to be like a lot of make it so.
It is. There's a make it so.
Yeah, make it so.
Did you write that page of Star Trek sewing jokes?
Whoa, that sound meant wind a new bobbin, lady. I was like, okay, I'm sorry.
It is literally all make it so.
I know.
But there's a whole board of it.
All right, so when I have like only a tiny bit left on my bobbin, and I don't know where my other spare bobbins are, I just unwind it real quick. And we are gonna wind a bobbin. This is very exciting. Now, when I sew at home, prefer to go with the strategy of wind like 800 bobbins at once, and then pretend that you don't ever have to wind bobbins again until you run out of those bobbins, which always happens at the most inopportune times, like when you're live on Facebook talking about, you know, being prepared and cutting things in advance and all this stuff. So you just wind a bobbin. This machine, it closes nicely, and you just have to step on the pedal, and then you just
Wait.
yeah, there's not a lot to do. You can keep looking at it though, you don't have to close the machine. Whoa. And on the other side of this, there's a list of all the machine stitches. So, remember I said it could do a lot of stuff? It actually has 270 stitches listed here, including pictographs, like a cat and a sheep and a maple leaf and a spool of thread and some scissors and a tulip and a snowflake, cathedral window, flower, heart,
Oh my
some
god.
loopy swirls, more hearts, some like stitches like this. I know there's a lot of stuff on here, so believe it or not, it's true. This machine can do a lot of things. Alright. Also, it's really easy to thread, which is nice if you are anything like me and you need to thread your machine a lot. Because you forget. Alright. So, we have a new bobbin. It's like a new lease on life. We are good to go. We're gonna sew some more with no more cranky sewing machine noises like, hey, give me a new bobbin, because it has one now. Okay. Alright, so now you have another row. Woohoo! Alright, so at this point, you take all these rows that you've assembled and you've been sewing them together so diligently, and you've got like part of a quilt. Now you're attaching these long strips of sashing to the tops of these rows, and that can get kind of tricky, so just take your time with it. But now you're going to take one of the rows that you assembled and making sure you have your sides, your directional fabrics going the right way. You're going to line up these long strips. Now, I think at this point I did pin because I don't want to get to the end and realize there's like an extra 8 inches hanging off the side and just wondering everything that I did in life. So I pin once at this end, and then I pin over here so that I know that those placements are right. And then I like to pin like on either side of a sashing strip. So that's what I'm doing here. And when you do this, make sure that you are keeping your edges of your fabric lined up, because that could get weird if you didn't.
What are you going to sew this weekend?
I bought this bag pattern. It's called the Tool Tote by Quilts Illustrated, and I am going to read the directions and I'm going to do it.
Wow.
It's like it's a real struggle to read directions for me, and this is like a book of directions. But I think I can do it. We'll see. You can follow along.
Amy says to ask her for pre-wound bobbins at QuiltCon.
Amy, you have pre-wound bobbins? Oh my goodness. I know that Wonderfill has pre-wound bobbins, and And so I do have a few of those at home, but I didn't know Amy had some too. Amy is one of our friends who is a Janome educator, so she knows everything there is to know about this machine. She probably knew about all 270 of the stitches before I read the directions. I'm notoriously bad at reading directions. I guess that should be noted.
Which is why we have you hosting this tutorial. It's great.
I just think, like, some people just learn more from looking at the pictures, and I'm one of those people, and visually, like, it helps, but, like, a big page of content is just not, like, yeah. It's funny because of the book. The book is why it's funny. Anyway. Okay. I think there are a lot of us out there in the quilt world that prefer to not read the directions. I usually get to the part in the directions where it says in big bold letters, read all directions, and I say, okay, and then just do whatever.
Just did.
Yep, read them. That was it. Cut to that part. That was the important bit. It was bolded. We're good. Okay. All right. So, now that we've got that seam finished, now we have almost all of a quilt. So now what we're going to do is take this really long bit of fabric, which I think is long enough, and
Let's hope.
we're going to line it up. And at this point, I'm not going to pin because I don't feel like I need to, but maybe, we'll see. And we're gonna sew it. Now this has some weird coloring on the end from the edge of the fabric. If you are in a pinch, you can leave this part on, but if you don't want it to show, just make sure that it's less than 1/4 inch, or more than 1/4 inch from the edge, because then it'll get caught up in your seam allowance. And no one needs to know what happens in the seam allowances. All right, so now we sew. And when you're doing this, again, just be careful that the feed dogs don't push your pressed fabric a different direction, because that will make it frustrating when you're pressing your quilt at the end. Yeah. Oh, drat. Okay. And I guess it's worth noting now that I've done it. If you've pieced your sashing together, make sure that you put the part with the raw edge on the back. Because I just didn't. So now I'm going to, instead of unpiecing everything else, I'm just going to, well, I could unpiece it, but I'm just going to cut that little bit off and then resew that part together going the other direction. Because I don't want to redo all that other work. Okay. There's like a fabric fight happening on the ground over here. Like you can't see it, but there's a bucket of fat quarters, and the boss is grabbing the fat quarters and then throwing them at Yael. And then Yael is going and like fighting off the fat quarter attack. And she's like sitting in this little position like with her fabric like this, and then she throws them back, and it's just it's a sight to see, people. This is what we do at work. It's exciting. Okay.
It's Friday.
It's Friday. It's so Friday. So you do this
Fabric
live.
Fight Friday.
Yeah, fabric fight Friday. Oh boy. Anyway, so now I'm re-sewing my sashing strip together with the seam in the back, not in the front. That helps. Okay. And I'm just gonna continue on my merry way like no one saw that happen. I only did that twice at home, so I guess it's good that I did it here too, because we go for realism here at Robert Kaufman. Sometimes quilting is the mistakes you make. Okay. Alright, so once you've got that, you have like a little bit of overedge here, so you're just going to cut that bit off by lining up your ruler with the edge of your patchwork squares. And
It's gonna end in 10 seconds. I'm gonna have to start a new one.
oh no,
That's not long.
well I'm not gonna be able to. That's a lot
So
of
we
pressure.
might just pause And y'all will have to just wait for a minute. We're back.
Okay, literally all you missed was me like wrestling this quilt top over here so that I could press the sashing strip up and get ready to attach the last part of the quilt, the last row. Now you're like 90% done. That's more than 2/3, guys.
Just only a little bit more than 2/3.
It went very quickly from 2/3 to like 100, but not 100 yet, so 90. Anyway, so now you have another strip at the top of sashing, and you're going to do the exact same thing with your last fabric panel where you attach it and use a couple pins. Whoa. Okay. This is helpful to have a decent sized workstation for, just because it does get kind of cumbersome having like any quilt does when you get to the end and it's like almost a full quilt here and you're working in a small space. It helps to have a little bit of room to breathe. Okay. Doing it.
You're so close.
You've almost got a quilt top. I mean, you'll still need to quilt it and bind it, but you'll have a top, and that will be exciting. And again, I am just adding a couple pins at the start of each block so that it keeps it from shifting too much while I want to sew it. And now I'm going to sew, and this will be the last seam of your quilt top. So, you know, just count down from 90 as you finish. Like by the time we get halfway done with this seam, you'll be like 95% done.
Do you have a big work area at home?
No. Well, in theory I could, but I'm kind of a messy quilter. Like I believe in leaving all my things out on the table all at the same time until I absolutely can't find them anymore. So I work on a space about this big at home. I have an entire table for it.
I have seen it, at least in photos.
Sometimes I clean it. It's really confusing when I clean things. All right. If you're pinning, make sure that you take your pins out before you sew over them, because it's always better for your machine and your health if you don't sew over your pins. If you sew over a pin, it could break. If it breaks, it could fly out at you. Injuries could be sustained. We're all about safety over here too. Safety and fun. That's Robert Kaufman. Now the nice part about the way the sashing is cut here is we don't have cornerstones. If you have sashing with cornerstones, then you have to be really careful to line up all of those seams too. But sashing without cornerstones is pretty forgiving because it can kind of hit anywhere and it'll still look nice. So even if it's off by just like a little bit, who's really gonna know? All right, so we are we're like 99% done right now. It's like a small miracle, but it's true. Oh my gosh. This is what 99% done looks like, and 100% will be when you press your seam. And it's all good to go. So we're getting there. Almost 100.
So it's the mic.
Right. Pressing, getting there. Whew. All right. And just like that, you are 100% done. Whoa, with your Churn About quilt top featuring London Collie.
I'm gonna zoom out, so just stand there right now.
And at 54 inches by 64 and a half inches, it's a good size for your lap or your couch. I was gonna say your bed, but I don't know anyone that has a tiny, tiny bed like this. Maybe if you have like a kid with like a baby bed, you know, not a crib, but not like a twin size bed yet. Anyway,
Yay!
this has been Churn About with It's So Friday and London Calling, and we hope that you enjoy